First, just to clarify a bit, the administration supported the AHCA, is that correct?
That's correct, yes, sir.
So really, the AHCA and this budget need to be looked at as a unit in terms of dollars and allocation.
I think that's fair, yes, sir, keeping in mind that I think we included, because there were some last-minute amendments, the Upton Amendment, I don't think made it into our assumptions just because of the timing allowed.
I understand. So that means that we're talking not about the $800 billion Medicaid cuts just in the in the AHCA, but also the cuts that are proposed in the budget. My understanding is that those are not identical, that there is, in fact, it's about $1.3 trillion combined. Is that your?
The number I've heard is 1.4, and that's drawn from the 800 from the AHCA and 600 from some of the other reforms that we propose, if I may.
Yes.
However, you can't add those two numbers together because there are components of those that overlap. So the total will be less than 1.4. Depends on what the final version of the bill looks like before you can say what the number is.
Is it somewhere in that range, 1.2 to 1.4?
It's someplace between 800 and 1.4. So if you wanted to round the difference off, what is that, 1.1?
Okay. So it's your position, as you were answering questions a minute ago, that you're not cutting Medicaid, you're simply cutting the rate of growth.
Yes, sir.
The problem is Medicaid, as you know, now pays the cost of a nursing home bed, for example, for an elderly person. So if the cost of the nursing home bed goes up 6%, and under your proposal, Medicaid reimbursement goes up 2%, there's a differential, isn't that so?
Under that set of circumstances, I guess there would be a differential, but keeping in mind that this.
Well, what assumption of growth of Medicaid were you using in the budget to create these numbers?
I think we use the CBO numbers on that? Okay, the growth, yeah, oh, no, that's fine, thanks. That's where the other 600 comes from. The assumption of the growth rate in Medicaid, we dialed it down a little bit, Senator, from what was in the AHCA, because the research that we had done during the preparation for that bill was that the actual growth rates in Medicaid were below what they have in the AHCA, and I cannot remember, I haven't.
So are you saying that your Medicaid, even with all of these cuts or whatever you want to call them, is going to meet the need of the elderly person in the nursing home?
Yes, sir, we do believe that.
So you're essentially saying there are no cuts?
But we're saying that we're slowing the rate of growth that's assumed in the Congressional Budget Office, but that the money that we provide for will still be enough to meet the population that Medicaid serves.
And so there are going to be no real reductions, even if, what I'm trying to get at is, does the assumption of your growth rate that's in your projections equal also the assumptions of the increase in costs of health care? Because as you know, health care has escalated at significantly above ordinary inflation.
It has, but Medicaid has not grown at that level. And by the way, before I say that we only slow the rate of growth, as I think I've tried to make clear in the couple times we've talked about that, there is 1 year where there's an exception, and that's an element of the AHCA where you end the grandfathering of the expansion of Medicaid in the various states ends, and that leads to a very small.
Well, what you're testifying here is that you're really not cutting Medicaid, and that all this about $1.4 trillion is just much ado about nothing. Is that your testimony?
Well, we have to measure it against the congressional budget, the baseline, and the baseline, everybody else wants to do it that way. We measured against the baseline. It's someplace around a 1.1, give or take, $1 trillion reduction against the baseline. We think the baseline is too high.
So that's the assumption. There'll be no negative impacts on disabled people, children, elderly. That's your testimony.
We care about.
I just want to be clear. That's your testimony.
We care about the disabled and the children and the elderly just as much.
So is it your testimony that these changes in the rate of reimbursement for Medicaid will have no effect on elderly, children, disabled people who are now beneficiaries?
We believe that to be the case, yes, sir.
All right, thank you for that testimony. Question on growth, and everybody wants growth. And we can talk about whether it's going to be 3% or 4% or 1.8, and clearly whatever the assumption is affects whether you're balanced in 10 years or 20 years or whatever. I understand that. None of us know what it's going to be. We all want it to grow. My problem is that when you think about, and Senator Perdue talked about productivity, you think about productivity, that's the engine of growth in the end.
Correct. And
one of the ways two of the principal ways you grow productivity are workforce training and research. My concern is that you're significantly cutting workforce training and research, both in NIH, but also particularly in the Department of Energy. There are elimination of Advanced Research Projects Agency, eliminated in the Department of Energy. Advanced Technology Vehicle Manufacturer, eliminated. Fossil Energy Research and Development Program cut by 58%. Nuclear energy cut by 31%. Energy efficiency and renewable energy cut by 70%. I don't know how you increase productivity by cutting research, and I'm not even talking about NIH, by cutting research and by cutting job training programs. You can't, that's what you need to grow the economy.
I'd love to have time to answer. It's an excellent question, and I think I have at least a reasonable answer to it, which is if you look at total R&D spending, it is up. If you look at the NIH spending with the reforms that we propose, and if I can very quickly, if you get a grant from a private foundation, you're only allowed to use 10% of it towards overhead. The average in the federal government is about 27, 28%. If you take the federal level to the same as the private level, you actually spend as much on NIH research this year as you did the year before.
So it's your testimony that actually is just like before. What looks like cuts in the budget are not really cuts. The end result will be the same.
We're trying to be more efficient with the use of taxpayer money. We think we can do it without negatively impacting the things that you've mentioned.
I don't have time for another question, but I will quote General Mattis with regard to the drastic cuts to the State Department. If you cut the State Department budget, you're going to have to buy me more ammunition. I think that's a huge policy mistake. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.